We're live now.
Okay, good afternoon. I would like to begin by welcoming those members of the public and press who are watching the live stream of this meeting via the Council's website. Members, you are by now aware of the need to keep your video camera switched on for the duration of the meeting and to keep your microphones muted except when I invite you to speak. Please click the raised hand function if you wish to ask a question or a comment. There is always a risk that we may run into technical problems during the meeting, and I'd ask for your patience if we have to tackle any of this. Should this occur, I will declare an adjournment while the fault is addressed and the public broadcast will be paused. If it is not possible to address the problem, the meeting may need to be abandoned and reconvened at a later date. So hopefully we won't need to do that, but it's just in case. To facilitate discussions, I intend to waiver the committee procedure rule limiting members' contributions to 5 minutes. I also propose to allow members to speak to more than once on each item if appropriate. However, please keep your contributions concise and to the point. Finally, I would remind members, officers and public speakers that all virtual meetings will be recorded and that these recordings will be published on the Council's website. Okay, so it's nice to see you all today. We'll move on to agenda item number 1, which is apologies for absence. I haven't been notified of any, and looking at the screen, I think everybody's here. So I'll begin by calling out your names. If you could just comment that you're present and then return your microphone to mute. So Councillor Ambrose Smith.
Present.
Councillor Downs.
Yes, sir.
Councillor Every.
Present.
Councillor Hay.
Present.
Councillor Hoy.
Here.
Councillor Netsinger.
Here.
Councillor Simon Taylor.
Here.
Councillor Whitehead.
Here.
Councillor Wisson.
Here.
And we have our 2 co-opted members, Andrew Reid representing the Church of England Diocese of Ely.
Yeah.
And Flavio Vitesse representing the Roman Catholic Diocese of East Anglia.
Present.
And of course myself, Councillor Bywater, as the chair. Thank you very much, members. We'll move on to item number 2, which is the declarations of interest. Does any member wish to disclose a disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest? I see no hands raised. If it does come up during the meeting, if you just draw it to my attention and we'll note it accordingly. Thank you, members. Okay, we'll move on to agenda item 3, which is the minutes of the meeting on the 26th of May this year. We are being asked to approve the minutes of the meeting of this 26th of May as a correct record. Can I ask any members who does not agree with this proposal to use the raised hand function now? Okay, so I see no objections. So on that basis, we'll approve the minutes as carried. I will sign a hard copy once I get back into the office. So thank you. Okay, we'll move on to agenda item 4, which is the action log. At our last meeting, Councillor Netsinger mentioned the slightly unusual arrangements in relation to the College of West Anglia. This means that the Council's representative is also required to complete the board's own selection process. Councillor Netsinger has confirmed that she is happy to continue as the Council's representative for now, provided that members remain content with this arrangement. If anybody on the committee has any difficulty with this, would you indicate now using the raised hand function? Okay, I see no objections to that. So in that case, Councillor Netsinger appointment will continue. Lucy, I'm assuming you're happy with this.
Yes, that's excellent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucy. Thank you. Okay, we'll now move on to agenda item 5, public petitions and questions. We've received no public questions or petitions, so we'll move on to our next item of business, which is decisions, the County Council's response to COVID update. Officers have been asked to bring a report on the COVID-19 response to date for the services for which each policy service committee is responsible. A similar report will be brought to each future meeting until further notice. Given the rapidly changing situation and need to provide the committee and public with the most up-to-date information possible, I accepted this late report on the following grounds. Reason for lateness: to allow the report to contain the most up-to-date information as possible. And the reason for urgency: to enable the committee to be briefed on the current situation in relation to the council's response to COVID-19 for those services for which it is responsible. Okay, so in order for the watching public to understand, we're going to move to this paper. I'll ask Wendy, the Children's Services Director, to introduce the report. But before I do that, we'll break it down into sections. So Lou will then give his part of the report. We'll ask Lou of questions. Lou will then leave the meeting because he then has to go to another meeting. We'll then invite John to describe the education side of it, and then we'll take questions, and then we'll move to the recommendations. Okay, so if everybody's content with that, we'll then ask Wendy to introduce the report, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Just to say that the first part of this report, outside what Lou and John have reported, is the same for every committee across the council, which in essence means that it is completed at the start of the month. So because our committee is met at the end of the month, I just want to give you a couple of updates. So if I can just point you to paragraph 1.2 and give you the update on that. So across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, the rates of cumulative lab confirmed cases of COVID-19 at the 8th of June 2020 was 1,669. That is lower than previously quoted because of data corrections. And sadly, there were 442 deaths from COVID across the area between the 27th of March and the end of May. So that's bang up to date. And then in section 1.6, in terms of recovery, just wanted to draw your attention to the fact that each of the directorates, so for children and young people, we've all developed recovery plans. And those recovery plans will go to our joint management team, but then obviously through the committee structure. And then we have a cross-county group that's looking at the returning to the workplace activity. So everybody's had to complete a template stating which workers they need back into work. And that will be reviewed to see if that is possible and to make sure that our buildings are safe for them to operate from. And then in 1.7, it talks about the recovery coordinating group. And just to let you know that I chair the vulnerable people's group across the county. So obviously that applies to vulnerable children and children who have challenges around education. So I'm chairing that key group, and we'll make sure that I feed into this group anything we're doing in relation to that. So thank you, Chair. That's my part. If I can hand over to Lou.
Okay, thank you, Wendy. Over to you, Lou.
Hello, nice to be speaking to you all again today, and thank you, Wendy. So, you know, there's clearly a brief summary in the report in terms of children's services. I guess the bit just to state at every opportunity really is that the position in children's services is one where we expect our peak in terms of demand to start from around now, and particularly actually after the schools go back properly in September, October. Activity has increased, which is a good thing. You know, we have been getting more referrals than we were at the start of the process, but we would expect to see a significant increase in referrals once children become more visible, essentially. The other thing just to say, I think, is that we are starting slowly to think about how we restart services. Obviously, there's been further announcements today around social distancing and changes to the way that that might work. And I think, I mean, that's from a children's services perspective, that's very positive, because it means we should be able to offer vulnerable children and young people a better service, not just meaning our own services actually, but you know, making sure that our partner agencies are having regular contact with vulnerable children and young people. We're continuing to do business as usual as far as we can. So, you know, we're actively recruiting. We've made some progress in terms of recruitment, even through this process. And some, I think I mentioned last time, we've seen a continuing trend of this, that some agency staff are seeming to want to have some certainty around employment and have been converting into permanent staff, which is really positive. We're running an assessment centre towards the end of June in relation to the next intake of assessed and supported years so essentially newly qualified social workers who will be our experienced social workers of tomorrow. And we've had a good level of interest there. So happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Lou. Members, anybody would like to raise any questions with Lou if you use the raised hand function? Okay, so Councillor Whitehead, would you like to start?
Thank you, Chair. Lou, it's not actually in your report, but I remember last time we had a discussion about the possibility of having to house children or asylum seekers, and you're thinking of using the outdoor facility at Grafham Water. Has that problem disappeared? Do we not need to find accommodation in a big hurry? Is it all under control?
Very prescient question, actually. So we have one young person who is accessing Grafham Water at the moment and started to do so from yesterday, possibly today. So right up to the minute. We will be looking for an alternative placement for him. But it was good to have that facility, actually, because obviously it has been needed. For the most part, we seem to be managing placement stability is okay. We seem to be managing that all right. But yeah, it was a good thing to have that backstop available.
Okay. Any supplementary questions, Joan? Are you content with that?
I'm content with that. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now move to Councillor Netzinger, and Peter, I've got you on my list, so I'll come to you afterwards. So Lucy.
Thanks. Actually, Joan's question is very similar to mine, and mostly it's now been answered, but just as a follow-up, I had understood that the Grafham Water site was not just for possible unaccompanied asylum seekers, but for anybody who was in need of an emergency placement. And I, from your nod, I can see that that is the case. So at the moment, we've just got this one child who is not placed. Presumably, I mean, it says it'll be reviewed over the summer, but I imagine that you will keep that facility kind of available, because I'm hearing from across the country that particularly some types of childcare placements for children are becoming quite difficult to source.
Absolutely. No, it wasn't just to be clear, it wasn't just for unaccompanied asylum seeking young people. It was for all of our children who might need a placement in a difficult or crisis situation. You're right that the placement market is challenging at the moment, has been for quite some time, to be honest. And it is older young people and young people who are quite challenging, who are most difficult to find placements for. It's also the case that a number of residential school type facilities that some of our children in care might be appropriate for are not generally accepting young people at all at the moment. So there's definitely a shortage, which is why we wanted to have that insurance scheme in terms of Grafham Water.
And it's going to continue for now?
For now, absolutely, yes. We'll keep it under review, but
Brilliant.
absolutely.
Okay, that's great.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Lucy. Councillor Downs.
Thank you. Lou, the summer holidays are going to be particularly difficult, I think, for all children, but for these children in particular, because of the lack of structure in some cases in the last few months or few weeks. Are we putting on any special summer activities for the young children, young people, especially people you were talking about?
So in terms of the relatively small numbers of children open to children's social care, we will be looking very much around sort of business as usual in terms of making sure we maintain lots of contact with them. We do have some flexibilities to organise some and spot purchase some support packages over the summer. I think one of the challenges has been, and I think John and I might want to have a conversation after this meeting at some point. One of the challenges around this has been that actually it's been quite difficult under the current guidance to think about group activities. So that there have been some challenges in that area. In terms of our early help services, absolutely, we've got a range of both virtual, looking now to see how we can not just have virtual, but have kind of hybrid approaches where some visits are happening and some activities are happening. But we're going to have to look at the latest government guidance and think about how that might help us actually run some more support services during the summer holidays.
Okay,
Just one other point, Simon, while
Yes.
I'm speaking, just to go back to Wendy's report. It's a very, very small drafting issue, but in paragraph 1.7, just to remind everybody that Huntingdon is Huntingdon Shire District Council, not just Huntingdon District Council. It's only a drafting thing, but we just need to be clear that that council covers the whole of Huntingdonshire, not just Huntingdon Town.
I'll feed that back, Councillor Downs. Thank you.
okay, thank you, Peter. John Lewis, you want to come in? You've got your hand raised.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. I was just going to pick up Peter's comment around summer clubs and Lou's statement around government policy. Literally an hour ago, the Prime Minister has announced that they are going to relax the rules to allow summer opening of clubs. We haven't got any guidance yet, but it will hopefully create some opportunities at least to create childcare and to support those where schools are running that type of provision. So certainly on the agenda now when it wasn't up till an hour ago.
Good.
Okay, thank you, John. Can members just mute their mics, please? Does anybody else want to ask Lou Williams any other questions? I can't see any other hands raised. If everybody's content with that, Lou, thank you very much for coming to the meeting. I know you've got to dash off. We'll now move to John Lewis, who can give us the education update. Thanks, Lou.
Thanks, Simon. I think hopefully my report's quite self-explanatory. We've had huge amounts of changes in education, constant shift in government policy going from school closure to opening to wider opening. So I've focused on the wider opening elements. We've seen more children from reception year 1, year 6, year 10 and year 12 return to school. And in terms of our school's commitment, we've seen high take-up, which is really positive. And obviously schools are very happy to have some of their children back. We are at the moment in an awkward stage. We don't yet have a firm announcement about what the expectations are for September opening, nor the summer. We're expecting guidance in the next few weeks, but a clear suggestion from the Secretary of State last week was that we would be expected to see all children return to school in the autumn. In the report, I have gone through some of the challenges we faced. Obviously, a very positive announcement around free school meals being provided to all over the summer holidays. And that's a positive way going forward. Again, we lack guidance, particularly around those children in year 11 that will be leaving school. Technically, the last day of education for year 11 is the last Thursday in June. And we wait to see whether the government's commitment extends to ensure that those families are supported throughout the summer. I won't go into any more detail. Happy to take questions on where we are. Obviously, you've got some figures and statistics in there, but happy to answer any questions.
Just unmute. Thank you, John. Councillor Netzinger, you've got a question.
Yeah, a couple. I think the first thing that I want to say is that I kind of get the impression from John's report that there's frustration with the DfE at the moment. I can't tell you how frustrated I am feeling with the DfE at the moment. It is just it's so impossible to try and make plans for anything at all at the moment. So I have a daughter who is in year 8. I have no idea whether she's going to be able to go back to school in September or not. I can see that year 8 will be one of, I mean, she's in year 8, she'll be going into year 9. They're going to be some of the children for whom it's, they're not going to be high priority children to get in, children like my daughter. So I simply have no idea whether she's going to be able to go back to school in September. And the frustration of that, I mean, I'm lucky because I work from home and it will be fine, but there must be so many families who just don't know what the position is going to be, and that's infuriating. I think it added to that is absolutely nothing coming out about what's happening over the summer holiday. So again, I'm in the lucky position of not needing to know whether I need childcare over the summer holiday because I'll be around at home anyway. But for many, many parents, and particularly key worker parents who have had whose children have been able to go to school throughout the lockdown and for all of this term, At the moment, they're seeing a date appearing quite fast in July when suddenly childcare is going to disappear. And there is nothing coming out of the DfE about how childcare is going to work over the summer. There's been some guidance, I think I've seen today, saying they're expecting that summer activities are going to be able to go forward, but they've said nothing about how. And those activities don't just start from nowhere. People have to plan them. They have to know what kinds of provision is going to be required, what's going to be possible. It's just, I think the thing that is making me the most frustrated of all is the issue about wraparound after school care for children whose after school care is not normally provided on their school site. So there are some children who have been able to go to after school clubs throughout lockdown, who've suddenly, that childcare provision has now disappeared because the government guidance changed, and off-school site provision is now not possible anymore. Some of that off-school site provision is in hospitals. So these are hospital staff who work shifts and long hours, who were managing to get childcare on site in the hospital, but now that is no longer allowed to happen. And it's just crazy that the DfE simply doesn't seem to be listening. And I know that there are lots and lots of childcare providers who are absolutely banging their heads against the wall, trying to get them to understand that after school childcare is really important for some of these key workers, and it's just been taken away, and it's making life very, very hard, not just for nurses and doctors and other NHS staff who can't get the childcare that they need, but also for childcare providers who don't know when they're going to be allowed to reopen and don't know what kind of situation they're going to be in all over the summer holiday. So I was picking up a certain amount of that frustration in your report, Jonathan. I have heard from other places that there has been, I mean, I think most of those messages have gone into the DfE, but it doesn't feel to me as if we're getting much back. I'm hoping he can give me some reassurance that people are listening.
Okay, John, over to you.
Yeah, I share your frustrations. I think you know, we all understand the need for everything to be safe and appropriate for children, and you know, we'll completely back that. I think some of the forward thinking and the lateral thinking about schools and how they operate is not simply a 9 till 3 operation anymore. It's a lot more complex than that. Was missed at the time. You know, I have weekly meetings with the Department for Education. I've raised the after school club one every single time. You know, we're hoping today's announcement is positive. You know, we are concerned about the financial viability of some of those providers. Have they survived? Will they be able to do anything in the summer? And I've been working with Wendy to think about, is there something we need to do sustainability-wise for providers, or look to do something different to keep that provision going, particularly for key workers that are going to be absolutely critical over the summer holidays. But at the moment, I say we've heard the announcement from Boris Johnson earlier. We hope to get some detailed guidance on top of the many other bits of guidance we're waiting for as well.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Thanks, John. Councillor Julie Wisson.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask John about the laptops. I think Councillor Bywater updated us that they'd been delivered, and I just wondered if they were being distributed to families.
Yeah, we don't have all of them in yet. We had 1,700 of the 2,000 delivered, and they've now been built. We put remote access software on them. We put educational resources onto them, and they're being sent out this week to individual children's homes. So, hoping they will be there imminently. We're still waiting for delivery of tablets for younger children. That's the bit that we're outstanding over the moment.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Julie. Councillor Downs.
Yes, thank you, Simon. My colleagues in our group on the council read your report. I sent it on to them, and they're broadly reassured by what you say. The specific question that they've asked me to raise is to do with paragraph 2.11 in your report, where you say that test and trace processes are working effectively. We would like to know which test and trace processes have you found to be effective, because nationally there has been a great deal, a lot of concern about the ineffective testing and tracing. So could you perhaps tell me so I can tell them?
Thanks, Peter. This is the process set up through Public Health England. We have a local arrangement that is fed by the national system, whereby I broker with schools the process. We've shared with them a flow chart of procedures. When they have a case that is notified, we provide advice, letters to parents of a suspected case. If that case isn't found to be an actual case, it closes. If it is found to be a case of COVID, Public Health England then contacts the head teacher. We do contact tracing through using the information in bubbles that we've developed with them, so they're fully clear on what they need to provide, and we close bubbles when that's appropriate. You know, to date, across the whole of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, we've had about 83 reported suspected cases. We have only had 3 actual cases so far. Testing has happened within 24 hours, and we've closed the bubbles immediately. There's been no delay. So, you know, my reading of that is an effective system. It's working, and we're able to make immediate action with good information, and the local authority is kept in the loop. So, whilst it might not be an app, it is certainly effective in terms of how we track those that have been in contact with a young person.
Can I ask a supplementary? Thank you. That seems very good idea. So the tracing is within the bubble. I mean, if a child were to be identified as having the infection, the tracing goes on within that bubble. Is that right? And what happens to so you see, I'm finding difficulty in the concept of the children staying obediently in bubbles. Less children have become more obedient in the 20 years since I retired, but we didn't always stay in the sort of bubbles I had in mind for them, even before COVID. What I'm slightly puzzled about is, suppose an infected child has also burst out of the bubble. How has that been traced? Or hasn't it been traced?
The within school, obviously, you know, we've set up protective measures to keep those bubbles secure. If they're not, it would be the expectation of the head teacher to pulling another bubble if they've mixed with another child in the school environment. It would be for the head teacher to disclose that at the time they took the call from Public Health England. Obviously, the tracing doesn't just happen in school. So if a child has for instance, in an example, has COVID, they track everyone out of school as well. It's just for the head teacher to inform them of what's happening in the school, because the parent may not necessarily have the contact details for all the other pupils in that class. So it's one part of a bigger process. Obviously, just the role for the head teacher is to make sure, you know, say for instance, if a deputy head's been in the room and, you know, has been within that group, they will have to isolate as well. So it's more a series of measures, of which the school is one part for it. And, you know, from what I hear, children are being very disciplined, Peter, and we are able to keep the continuity of those bubbles.
Yeah, but I'm sure the vast majority, that's good, but it's the honesty who cause the trouble. So just to be quite clear, suppose the child is infected and has been home and of course talked to people who are not in the bubble because he's not at school. The head teacher rings the parents and says it looks as though Johnny may have the COVID infection. What exactly do the parents then do about it's the tracing bit that puzzles me. Yeah. What resource does a parent have if they get a telephone call from the head?
Okay, it's not for the head to trace. The head provides the contact details for Public Health England, and they go and contact the parents, so they give them the specific medical advice. We do have a suite of letters that outline, you know, there is a case in your class. This is what you need to do. This is where you go to get your test, and this is the next stages of it. So that comes out from the school, but it's down to Public Health England and Health Protection team to speak to parents and tell them what they need to do next. that the head teacher is the person that provides the contact information and passes on that information, not providing advice to parents apart from letters that they're sending out.
Okay, so it's a public health system. Right, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you. I've got two questions. First of all, on the finance, Jonathan, on paragraph 3.2, which does look quite horrific. And I was thinking, it says at the bottom that this doesn't relate to the spend on the dedicated schools grant. And I just wondered where we are with the high needs block, because presumably during this period, we will not have had referrals as we've been expecting them, I assume. So presumably there is not the pressure on the high needs block that there was previously, which of course, as we all know, stands at a great deficit. But presumably we are possibly expecting that to, when children do go back to school, to be a huge increase and pressure on that budget. I mean, I don't think there's anything we can do about it, but is that something that we may well be able to, if there is a huge increase, add to our, request for COVID-related costs, or would that come under a separate budget? Sorry, it's a bit of a complicated question, then I've got a slightly less complicated one.
Okay, so interestingly, we've seen more referrals than we normally have. That's because our SEND coordinators, our SENCOs, have a little bit more time on their hands and have been certainly doing their paperwork. So we've had more requests for assessment. Obviously, at the moment, we're in the middle of reviewing every child's education, health and care plan to look at appropriate provision during this period. So there's lots of to and fro and discussions around that going forward. Spend so far, I wouldn't consider we're putting any more money out into the system currently. Obviously, those assessments will take up to 20 weeks to come through. I think the government are very aware that there will need to be further investment into schools. A lot of the money at the moment talks about catch up. I think you've heard from Lou. We've got a range of social issues we're going to need to deal with. There'll be some educational issues on top of that. We'll keep a very close eye on it, and certainly, if the costs do arise, we will be obviously looking to make a claim towards government or talking to the DfE about additional funding for that.
And do you think we're likely to get it, or the system is likely to get additional funding, or is it too soon to say?
I think a little bit too soon. I think there's been a huge investment in education. £1 billion in catch up, 110 million on summer school meals. I don't know. The commitment around the increases in the DSG that were promised last year are going to be kept, because we were worried that the additional funding going to 4 billion and 7 billion extra were going to be lost, but actually they've still be committed to. I suspect they may roll that into that commitment. Any additional costs will need to be met from that pot, but I don't know. We'll have to wait and see.
My other question relates really.
Joan, just before you ask your supplementary question or second question, Wendy's raised her hand. Wendy, is it something you wanted to come in with?
I just thought Councillor Whitehead might want to know a bit about the funding issue she was talking about, in that, and it is linked to education, is there's a number of our children with special educational needs and disabilities that have not been able to go into school because of their vulnerabilities. But what we have made sure is that we've funded from the COVID money additional support for those individual children, because obviously parents really do struggle with that. I think that's important for people to understand. But we've also put in business cases that recognise the likely increase in children referred to our children's social care services as the impact of COVID hits. And obviously, we also put the business case in to use Grafham Water, which we have needed to do. So I think that's very positive. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Whitehead, you carry on, please.
Yeah, the second point relates really to children starting school again in September. I mean, it's quite clear from the response to COVID-19 that there are people at one end of the continuum who are clearly highly anxious, over-anxious, I would say, terrified, paranoid about the risk of getting COVID-19, through to people at the other end who have a much more balanced view about risk. I mean, you can never have a risk-free environment. And I just feel lots of people saying, oh, well, I don't want my children to go back to school till I know it's safe. Well, how are we going to be able to define safe when it comes to September? And I'm not saying we've got an answer to this now, but clearly some thought will have to go into at some stage, will it not? about trying to educate, parents about what would be the risk involved of their child going back to school. I mean, there is a sense, I feel, that a lot of the public are behaving as if before COVID-19, we never had any infectious diseases. It was always safe. You'd never catch anything. And we all know that's not true. There's common colds, influenza, and certainly when I was teaching, which was a long time ago, I admit there was a chickenpox outbreak, German measles outbreak. And I just feel that that's a problem in the waiting. And I suppose I'm just perhaps alerting and saying, and maybe Johnson's thought about it, but it is something we're going to have to think about what is the message we give out, if schools start in September, because safety cannot be guaranteed, not under any circumstances. We can, and I think it is to do with not what you do in the schools, but how people perceive that kind of risk. And so that's just a comment really about things we might have to look at in the future. I mean, obviously other people may have comments they want to make about that.
Thank you, Joan.
I think Chair, if I can come back on that, I think you're absolutely right. I think the success of the campaign of getting people to stay at home will have a negative impact on attendance, particularly from September. We wait to see what protective measures need to be put in place. Obviously, public health advice, the status of the virus at that time, and whether actually schools will formally reopen or not. Because obviously, at the moment, we are suspended in terms of attendance, issuing of fines. If that restarts, people's view may change. So I think it's really important we consider that. We will be running a campaign over the summer about getting children ready for school again. And certainly public health messages will need to form part of that to give people the confidence that it's safe to return.
Thank you, because what does concern me is possibly the children who most need to return to school may well be the ones whose parents don't want them to return. And that is very worrying, I think.
Thank you, Councillor Whitehead. Councillor Simon Taylor.
Oh, yeah, sorry about the delay. Yeah, I just wanted to touch a little bit. I thought I saw it in the report, but for the life of me, I can't find it now. Children's centres. I mean, I know it's going to be much the same as schools, but we haven't really touched on children's centres, and would like to sort of know that, that they're not being forgotten about, really. I don't know if this one was best for Lou. I'm not quite sure who it's best for.
Shall I take that?
Yes,
Simon?
Wendy. Come in, Wendy, please.
Yeah. Hi, Simone. It's actually, I've been talking to Lou about this. So as part of our return to work, we've been working with all of our children's centres to look at how they might do that safely. There are many of our children's centres that have remained open, particularly for midwifery appointments, so they haven't all been closed. So along with our wider workforce in children's services, that does include our children's centres as well. Many of our children's centres have been doing virtual sessions with parents, and actually many of our parents have reported that they've really found the parenting programmes useful that have been done online, and some of them have preferred that, which I think is really positive. But to answer your question, they are part of the reopening of children's services in its totality.
Thank you, Wendy.
Okay, so we've got Councillor Every.
Thank you, Chair. A question back for John. I just want to focus a little bit now on our current year 11 and current year 13. As I watch the process of pulling together the examination results that we're going to get. Normally, these happen towards the back end of August, and then there's a transition period into our post-16 and into university and or work or apprenticeships and so on. I'm really concerned, and I know these belong to the academies because all the secondary schools are academies, but I'm really concerned that we've done doing a lot with other youngsters who are coming back into school, but this is the future of our youngsters who are have not taken their exams but have got a future in front of them, and I don't know whether, I'm sure you have got plans, but that smooth transition, because it's going to be a bit of a bumpy ride whatever happens, is something that really concerns me. Those at year 11 who are going on to their post-16 establishments, but also those 18-year-olds who would have perhaps gone to university in September, but now it might be deferred for 3 months, and we're going to have a waiting group out there, which really does concern me. Are you able to have any reassurance about how this process is being managed or will be managed? I know it's still early days.
Yeah, obviously destinations remains a key measure for all our secondary schools, and obviously high on their priority list to make sure children and young people continue their education. So I know lots of the staff in schools are making contact, providing support for those year groups, even some doing work ready to get students back up to speed, ready to go back into a new establishment. Obviously, their results will be based on predictions submitted by the schools that are then moderated by the exam bodies. I can reassure you, certainly Hills Road and Long Road are part of the Secondary Heads Association. There's been lots of conversation about getting them ready, virtual tools, giving them work that's age appropriate, ready for them to come back in. You know, it's going to be a key focus area. You know, our teams at the council are at the moment looking at potential needs and what we need to do to support with those groups. I think as much as possible is being done, but hopefully a group that isn't forgotten. But I'm very confident our leaders in schools have a very close eye on them going forward, and we'll make sure in September they settle effectively.
Could I just ask a supplementary, because what I mean, we were looking at the process yesterday, and about what those results are likely to look like. When will we have an indication of those results, and perhaps what the impact of not taking exams, I know they can take them again in September, of not having those exams is likely to have overall? Have we any ideas? Because obviously not being able to take an exam after having done mocks and so on has worried some youngsters.
Yeah, the process for children and young people will be exactly the same as it normally is. So I think it's the 20th of August, might be the 19th. GCSE results will be published. These have been based upon grades that have been submitted by schools. There is a national moderation review. I think they're using 3-year trends. They're looking at mock results, teacher assessments. You know, national press is saying there's a lot of grade inflation been built in. You know, there are cohorts that are stronger this year that weren't so strong the previous year. I think we don't know the impact. We don't know whether it's going to be accurate. You know, will children and young people lose out? That is why the government are initiating a set of exams in the autumn for those that aren't happy with their results, that they can resit them, formally do an assessment in the autumn with a view to quickly turning them around. But there's obviously a lag there between a course starting and that exam happening. So I think it's going to be a messy late summer, and it's going to be one where schools and the local authority need to work together to try and best support those young people, particularly when they are disappointed with their results, when they haven't had a chance to formally show that their skills or their ability, or for those children like myself cramming late and learning late, they obviously won't get the benefit of that. So it's going to be a challenging time, I think, for families and children.
Okay, thank you very much, John.
Thank you. Councillor Downs.
Yes, thank you. Just to pick up that last point, previously the gender factor has been quite significant in this question of the timing of exams, and Jonathan just alluded to it. I mean, the pattern used to be that, well, in shorthand, boys would swan around and enjoy themselves and not bother very much, and then they'd get the mock exam and be doing pretty awful, and then make a bit of an effort in the last few weeks, and then actually do quite reasonably well in the exam, because again, traditionally boys actually perform slightly better in exams. So it'll be very interesting to see how these results turn out in terms of the gender factor specifically, and that is exacerbated, of course, by socio-economic situation as well. But it will be fascinating to see how that works out. I wanted to raise my hand, if I may, just to go on to pick up one of Joan's points, and just to clarify my own mind about parental anxiety about returning in September. Now, my understanding of what Maurice Johnson said an hour or so ago was that schools will reopen normally from September. Or did I misunderstand that? So there won't be any choice about whether you send your child back or not. Well, and with the usual fines or whatever. But the schools, we're now with a plan on the assumption that school will be functioning in normal pattern from September, and then the previous wisdom, when I say previous, about a week ago, will no longer apply. Is that your understanding of today's statement, Jonathan?
Well, we know the legislation around schools staying closed and not having to pursue things like attendance fine runs out at the end of July.
Yeah.
So at the moment, we assume full opening in September. You know, the Secretary of State has said that, but we have no guidance to back that up yet. We promised that within 2 weeks, so it will probably give our leaders in schools 3 or 4 weeks to prepare before the summer holidays for that. But we don't know. We don't know if the virus is still prevalent. Will there still be the optional element to schools? I can't tell. At the moment, we're assuming full opening from September, but I'll wait to see what the government guidance says when we have it.
Yes, I think they say it's going to be opening as normal. So perhaps they've got wisdom that the rest of them have got. We should see.
Yeah, I think, to be fair, Peter, they've never actually come out and said schools formally open or closed. It's been a bit of a as we go type process. So until we see it firm in writing and we know the legislation is properly enacted, schools remain closed as they are now. Technically, they are closed as of today, but they are open to certain year groups through a government ask rather than statutory requirement.
Thank you very much. I've seen that there's nobody else got their hand raised. Is everybody content that they've asked what they wanted to ask? If not, please raise your hand now. Okay, okay, so we'll move to the vote. I just want to quickly summarise. I don't think I can disagree with anything that's been said this afternoon. I mean, I want to say a huge thanks to John. I know that you've been working extremely hard with your team. I also want to thank the academies, all our school settings within Cambridgeshire. I think everybody's been absolutely exceptional in trying to adapt and remain flexible to the circumstances we face ourselves. And I think those two words, flexibility and adaptability, are going to be absolutely key in the next weeks and months ahead, really. And also just to say thank you to Lou's team. I know Lou's left, but also thank him and Wendy, of course. So just to move to the recommendations, I'm proposing to take them on block, and just for the public who are watching this meeting, the recommendations are to note the progress made to date in responding to the impact of coronavirus. And recommendation B is to note the continuing commitment of leaders and staff across children's services and partner agencies to ensure that the needs of all children and young people continue to be met. Is everybody content to support those recommendations? If you don't, please raise your hand now. Okay, I'll take that as carried then. So thank you very much. Thanks, John. Okay, just a bit of housekeeping now. We'll just move on to agenda item 7, which is the agenda plan, appointments and training plan. We will now review the committee's agenda plan, appointments and training plan. Would the Democratic Service Officer update the committee on any changes to the agenda plan since publication? Rashenda.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, if I run through very briefly, there have been a small number of changes, and I will circulate these to committee members tomorrow. In September, there are 4 reports coming from Jonathan Lewis: the Service Director's Report, the SEND Recovery Plan, Schools Funding Consultation Outcome, and an update on opportunity area impact on attainment in East Cambridgeshire and Fenland. All of those will be brought under one report, so they will be covered, but as part of one report. Also, to the September meeting, the committee is due to have the annual report from the Children's Safeguarding Partnership Board. We're going to speak to the chair of the board, and subject to his agreement, that will be moved to the following meeting, October, and there will also be a report, a service director's report there from the Service Director for Children and Safeguarding. Those are the only changes, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Rashenda. Members, are there any comments or questions regarding the agenda plan? Okay, no, there's nobody. Just quickly, we discussed Councillor Netzinger's appointment to the College of West Anglia earlier in the meeting. There are no changes to the appointments contained in the published papers for the training plan. So I propose to take them as noted unless anyone's got any questions. Has anybody got any questions? Okay, no. Okay, so that brings me to the end of today's meeting. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today and the members of the public watching. The committee will next meet on Tuesday, the 7th of July. This will also be a virtual meeting. I now declare this meeting closed. So thank you very much, everybody, and I'll see you next time.